When you hear the name Jesus, what comes to mind? For some, it's church on Sundays. For others, it's rituals, prayers, sacraments, and sacred traditions. For billions, it's Christianity itself, one of the world's largest religions. But here's the paradox. Jesus never called himself a Christian. He never built a church building. He never asked for denominations, doctrines, or dogmas. So what did he really come here for? Think about this. Religion has divided humanity for thousands of years. Wars have been fought in God's name. Nations rise and fall under banners of faith. People argue endlessly about who's right, who's wrong, who's saved, and who's condemned. But if you strip away the layers of tradition and look closely at his words, you'll see something shocking. Jesus wasn't pointing us to a religion. He was pointing us to a way of life, a way of love, and a hidden kingdom within. In this video, we'll dive deep into the forgotten truth that Jesus never came to start a religion. He came to awaken humanity. Jesus and the context of his time. To understand why Jesus' message was so radical, we need to travel back 2,000 years, to a world ruled by empires and controlled by religion. In Judea, the heart of Jewish life was the temple in Jerusalem. Every year, thousands would travel miles just to offer sacrifices. Priests controlled the rituals. The Pharisees and Sadducees debated the law of Moses in fine detail. Hundreds of rules about purity, food, washing, and Sabbath. Religion was not optional, it was life itself. And over all this hovered the Roman Empire. Rome demanded taxes, loyalty, and submission. To keep the peace, they allowed the Jewish leaders to run their religious system, as long as it didn't challenge Caesar's power. So imagine. For the ordinary person, faith often meant strict rules, fear of breaking the law, and endless offerings at the temple. God was seen as distant, locked behind the walls of the temple, accessible only through priests, sacrifices, and rituals. And then came Jesus, a carpenter's son from Nazareth. Not a priest, not a Pharisee, not a political leader. He stood in the streets, not in the temple courts. He spoke with fishermen, tax collectors, prostitutes, and the poor. Instead of adding more laws, he said, "My yoke is easy, my burden is light." He looked people in the eye and told them something revolutionary, that God was not confined to a temple, not owned by priests, not limited to rituals or sacrifices, but that the divine was closer than they ever imagined, living, breathing within their very hearts. John 4 verses 21 to 23. The hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. True worshippers will worship in spirit and in truth. This was a thunderclap to the ears of his time. In a world where religion was about buildings, rituals, and authorities, Jesus was pointing people to something personal, internal, alive. What Jesus actually taught. When Jesus spoke, his words were unlike anything the people were used to hearing. The religious leaders taught rules. The priests emphasized sacrifices. The empire demanded obedience. But Jesus? He spoke in stories, in parables, in simple truths that pierced the heart. Instead of long rituals, he gave two commands that summed up the entire law. Love God with all your heart. Love your neighbor as yourself. No rituals, no complicated codes. Just love, pure, radical, unconditional love. But Jesus went even further. He didn't just say, love your neighbor. He said, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who persecute you. Think about how shocking that was. In a world built on revenge, where tribes fought tribes and Rome ruled by the sword, Jesus was pointing to a higher way, a kingdom not of this world. Luke 17 verse 21. The kingdom of God is within you. He wasn't telling them to search for God in the temple or to run to the mountains. He told them, the kingdom of God is already inside you. This was not the language of religion. This was the language of awakening. For the poor, the oppressed, the forgotten, this was hope. For the religious authorities, it was dangerous. Because if God is already within every person, then no priest, no empire, no institution can claim to control the way to God. And this is why Jesus' message turned the world upside down. He wasn't building a new religion. He was calling people back to the essence of life itself: love, forgiveness, inner transformation. A kingdom not built with walls and swords, but a kingdom of the heart. How religion formed after Jesus. After Jesus was crucified, his followers were left shaken. His followers were heartbroken, confused, and afraid. Some believed he had risen. Others clung desperately to his memory and his words. In those early years, Christianity wasn't a religion, it was a movement. At first, it was not about churches or cathedrals. Followers met in homes, not temples. They broke bread together, shared their possessions, and prayed in secret. There were no grand buildings, no official doctrines, no clergy in robes. Just ordinary men and women, inspired by the memory of a teacher who spoke of love, forgiveness, and a kingdom within. They called it the Way, not a religion but a way of living. As the years passed, his message traveled beyond Judea, into Greece, Rome, and the far reaches of the empire. So as the movement grew, so did the resistance. Rome saw these gatherings as dangerous, people refusing to bow to Caesar, claiming another kingdom. Persecution followed. Christians were hunted, imprisoned, even killed in arenas. And in the face of death, the early believers began to write letters, gospels, testimonies, trying to preserve the teachings before they were lost. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, debates began. Which writings were true? Which teachings should be accepted? Different groups, some focused on love and inner awakening, others on strict doctrine, clashed with each other. Eventually, powerful leaders stepped in. Councils were formed. Books were chosen. Some texts, like the Gnostic Gospels that spoke of inner knowledge, were declared heretical and hidden away. The message of Jesus was no longer just a living way of love. It was becoming a system of belief. By the 4th century, Christianity was no longer an outlawed faith. When Emperor Constantine converted, it was suddenly embraced by Rome, the very empire that once tried to crush it. But with Rome's blessing came Rome's influence. Churches became state institutions. Councils decided which books would form the Bible, and which writings to burn or hide. The living word of Jesus was systematized into creeds, doctrines, and dogmas. Faith was no longer just about a personal journey inward. Faith became tied to authority, rituals, and political control. What began as a movement of love and inner transformation was slowly reshaped into a religion of power, hierarchy, and control. And so, the man who came to free us from religious chains was turned into the centerpiece of a religion with its own chains. Was this preservation of his truth, or the birth of something he never asked for? This is the question history leaves us with, and one that we must wrestle with even today. Now let's see exactly what are the difference between Jesus' message and religion. Religion often says, follow the rules, perform the rituals, obey the leaders. But Jesus said, love one another, forgive without limit, become like little children to enter the kingdom. Do you see the difference? Religion builds walls, who's in, who's out. But Jesus broke walls. He touched lepers, ate with tax collectors, spoke with women, and praised the faith of foreigners. Religion says, God is far and you need us to reach him. Jesus said, the kingdom of God is within you. Religion can become a heavy burden, laws upon laws, traditions upon traditions. But Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Religion often thrives on fear, fear of punishment, fear of hell, fear of being excluded. But Jesus taught freedom, perfect love that casts out fear. Religion points to institutions. Jesus pointed to transformation. Religion can create followers who conform. Jesus wanted disciples who awaken. Religion builds monuments of stone. Jesus was building living temples, hearts filled with love. This is why his words were so dangerous to the authorities of his time. Because if every person carries the divine spark within them, then no priest, no system, no empire can claim to control the way to God. And that was revolutionary. The esoteric view. To the crowds, Jesus spoke in parables, simple stories about seeds, vineyards, shepherds, and coins. But to his disciples, he hinted at deeper truths, mysteries of the kingdom not spoken to everyone. Some of these hidden teachings survive in texts outside the Bible, like the Gnostic Gospels, which speak of knowledge, gnosis, and awakening within. When he said, "Take up your cross," many thought only of suffering. But esoteric tradition sees another meaning, the cross as a symbol of transformation, dying to the ego so the higher self may live. When he said, "Be born again," religion turned it into a formula, repeat a prayer, join a church. But mystics knew he was speaking of inner rebirth, awakening the soul like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. And when he said, "The kingdom of God is within you," it wasn't metaphor. It was a revelation that heaven is not just a place above, but a state of consciousness within. From an esoteric lens, every miracle of Jesus carried symbolic meaning, turning water into wine, transforming the ordinary self into the higher self, healing the blind, opening inner eyes to spiritual truth, raising the dead, awakening souls trapped in ignorance back to life. These were not just wonders to prove his power. They were lessons in spiritual alchemy, codes for those ready to see. The hidden message of Jesus was never about religion, but about realization. That each soul carries the divine spark. That the journey is not just to worship him, but to become awakened as he was. A living embodiment of love, truth, and light. Religion may guard doctrines, but the esoteric Jesus invites us to experience God directly. Not through temples or priests, but through the awakening of our own hearts. Why this matters today. 2,000 years later, humanity still wrestles with the same problem. Religion has become a source of identity, but also of division. Nations still fight wars in God's name. Families argue over doctrines. Denominations split over rules and rituals. But if Jesus never came to start a religion, what does that say about the way we live today? It means that when we reduce his message to rituals and dogmas, we risk missing the point. Because his call was never, "Join my religion." It was always, "Follow me." Not follow an institution, but follow the way of love, forgiveness, and inner awakening. Imagine a world where instead of fighting over who has the right religion, we live out the truth of his teachings. Loving our neighbor as ourselves. Forgiving those who wrong us. Seeing the divine spark in every human soul. Wouldn't that world look more like the kingdom of God he spoke about? Religion can give us tradition, identity, and belonging. But the heart of Jesus' message goes beyond all of that. It is about transformation, becoming love itself. And in a time when humanity faces so much fear, hatred, and division, perhaps his true message is exactly what we need to remember. Jesus didn't come to build a religion. He came to awaken a revolution of the heart. A revolution that begins not in cathedrals, not in councils, but within you. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of history is this. The man who came to set people free from religious chains was turned into the center of a religion with its own chains. But here's the good news. His true message was never lost. It is not locked in ancient temples, nor buried under doctrines. It is alive here now, whispering in your heart. The kingdom of God is within you. And maybe that's the real choice we face today. Do we follow religion, or do we live the awakening? Do we memorize the rules, or do we embody the love? Because in the end, Jesus didn't call us to belong to a religion. He called us to become light in the darkness. And so I ask you, are you simply following traditions? Or are you walking in the way of love, the way of freedom, the way of awakening that Jesus came to reveal? If this message resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to continue uncovering the hidden truths of Jesus' teachings, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Together, let's rediscover the message that can still change the world, one awakened heart at a time.